Have you ever wondered about the word wonder? Or maybe, rather I should say, have you ever wondered what's so wonderful about wonder? This is Mike Creevy, host of the Gracious Guest Show, which is the show that you're currently listening to right now. And no doubt you've discovered this show through various ways: iTunes, Podbean, Pocket Casts. I forget the one my mom actually mentioned to me last week, that there was another service that she sort of discovered the show through as well. So there's even podcast sharing. What's it called? There's podcast sharing methods out there I wasn't even aware of that must feed into each other, which is pretty cool in this day and age. So at any rate, however you got here, you're here and welcome. And I'm very happy that you're listening to the podcast today, because today, as you've seen from the title that you clicked on here, it's that question I'm asking. What's so wonderful about wonder? And this is something I've been thinking about for a while, not just because Wonder Woman's out. I haven't seen it yet. I've heard great things. I think Rotten Tomatoes actually had a crazy high percentage, review, like positive review on it. And I think it said it's like tied with, it's I don't know if it's tied, but it's right up there with The Dark Knight. And I can't remember off the top of my head what the other one is either. I'm drawing a blank. But it's like in the top 2 or top 3 of all time best rated superhero movies on Rotten Tomatoes. So hey, I'm gonna go check it out for sure. So wonder, the word itself, one of those words that we all kind of know what it means, but if someone stops you on the street and says, "Tell me what wonder is," you have to think about it a little bit. So let's just look here. The number one definition that pops up if you just Google the word wonder is a feeling of surprise mingled with admiration caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. Read that again. A feeling of surprise mingled with admiration caused by something beautiful, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. I think that's right on with certainly what I wanted to reflect on here today, and why I'm bringing this up. There's a really brilliant professor. I've heard him do a couple podcasts in a couple different venues. Dr. Donald DeMarco. He's professor emeritus of philosophy at St. Jerome University in Waterloo, Ontario. Also teaches at Holy Apostles College and Seminary, and he's a corresponding member for the Pontifical Academy for Life. It's a special office set up by the Pope many, many years ago. As Pope John Paul really kind of gave it a lot of gusto, but it's a specific kind of group of people that really kind of thinks through and studies and talks about and writes papers and presentations, all this kind of stuff, and really just tries to influence the discussion about life and the dignity of life, the value of life. So anyways, but Dr. DeMarco had this really interesting quote. He had this article, he was talking about wonder, and he says this, he says, quote, "The wonder that ignites the philosophical mind also allows us, to be charmed by an intelligibility we do not fully grasp. It is to be intrigued by the effects of a cause that remains hidden from us, but is potentially knowable. We look at the stars and wonder who or what brought them about. We gaze at celestial bodies with awe as we wonder what they are and how they got there. Wonder activates the mind and sets it on a course of discovery. Awe is the momentary feeling of being spellbound in the presence of the something that stirs our sense of wonder." And as long as I'm throwing quotes from people that are much smarter than me out there, Socrates said, and Plato, of course, talks about this, on occasion, this idea that wisdom begins in wonder. So, what does all that mean, though? Or why is that? What really is going on here? Well, funny enough, it's again, for me, like this kind of stream of thought started when I Wonder Woman came out, and for some reason the word wonder stuck in my head. And I thought, what is it that is so, wonderful about wonder? What is wonder? You know? And I've been driving a lot lately, and it's one of these words that, how like sometimes a word itself just gets stuck in your head, and all of a sudden you realize like 10 minutes have gone by and you're just thinking about that word still. That's basically what happened to me. And I was doing a project for a grad course I'm in right now in my theology program, where I came across the Greek word thaumazo, and it has lots of different variations. But that word that we oftentimes translate as wonder in the New Testament, and it appears 43 times in the New Testament. It's a very common word, and different versions of it. And it's translated, wonder, amazement, astonishment, marvel, usually associated with some sort of miracle of Jesus, most especially the resurrection. And it's interesting, when you go back to that first definition again, and let me just share it one last time. Again, wonder, a feeling of surprise mingled with admiration. So in other words, it's not just like a terrifying surprise, it's something it's potentially good or interesting, beautiful, right? Caused by something beautiful, okay, unexpected, unfamiliar, or inexplicable. No, it doesn't. So it's not something, I think the idea here is it's not something that is just to be explained away. It's not something that's just at, sort of my beck and call. It's an experience or some sort of reality, something I detect, something I encounter, but it's mysterious. And what's interesting, we think of mystery, I talk to my students about this a lot in my class. We think of mystery, and it almost always in our mentality means, we associate with like a mystery story, a mystery novel, a movie, something like that, where it's precisely something that is to be solved, fixed, figured out, unraveled, and that very much, comes out of that vein of like Sherlock Holmes or Father Brown, or I love Columbo. That old 1970s detective. My wife makes fun of me all the time for this, because you watch those old shows and they're like incredibly boring a lot of times, just because we're used to a different pace now with movies and shows and stuff. But at any rate, anyway you look at it, all the way up through like Monk and Psych, and like any detective show or movie or book or short story, whatever, that's the whole point of the mystery, is that it's gonna be solved and I'm gonna know all. Like, I'm like, oh, got it. But that's not really what the word mystery meant in its original context, or even what it means like in Christian tradition. Mystery is precisely something that can't be solved, something that is not meant to be grasped entirely, not because it's not fair, but because it's an accurate sort of reflection of where I really fit in the grand scheme of things. So in other words, wonder, marvel, no mistake, Marvel Comics, right? Like, what's going on? Well, even though they have these fights that these big fights that they fight out against these enemies and stuff like that, at the end of the day, even when you know where someone got their powers from, there's still this sense, like, if you look at Marvel from the standpoint of, who's the audience for that word? Well, the kids reading the comic books, right? You're a teenage kid, well, sometimes a lot older than that, but at any rate, whoever the audience is, we're regular people reading these comics or watching these movies, and we're filled with a sense of marvel because the circumstances surrounding these fantastic people, even if we know what those circumstances are, still draw us into this what if, right? This marvelous kind of experience, these superpowers, these people that are something other than what I am, not completely unapproachable, not completely, non-understandable. I get they have their struggles, they have their difficulties. A lot of times they have a regular past, kind of like me, but then something happens, and changes them. And now they have this new dimension, this new pitch of existence that, even if I can wrap my head around a little bit of it, I can't quite get the whole thing. There's some sort of marvelous wonderful, awe-inspiring thing about them, that I can't be just like them because I don't have those same circumstances, but maybe I can mimic some things about them. There's this line in Man of Steel, not the most recent Superman movie, but the one before that, where Jor-El is talking to Kal-El, the alien father talking to the alien son, who's of course Superman, and he says something to the effect of, in terms of calling him to this mission of leading mankind, right, and setting the pace, and he says, like, they'll chase after you, and they'll fall, and they'll stumble, but this idea that he's going to lead them up, and this sense of rising above just the humdrum day-to-day. And you see this in all sorts of different spiritual movements. I would, of course, argue in another venue that there's a lot of, mistakes that people make, or there's a lot of misunderstandings that can lead you into, maybe some false understandings even. But the principle there, that this is about rising above, rising up out of this belief that what I see, knock on, whatever I'm knocking on the side of my little studio here, like whatever I see and touch and perceive with my senses, that's it, that's the threshold of existence. Well, deep down, I know that's not true. And I would argue, I'd push back to those who really insist, no, it's true. Only what I can see and feel and detect through scientific means, like, that's all that's real. How do you know that, right? You cannot scientifically prove to me, beyond all shadow of a doubt, that that's where all existence terminates, is just the detectable, just the material, And quite frankly, our human experience, I really think, if we're really honest with ourselves, I think our human experience bears that out, And let me go back to this DeMarco quote again. I love this. He says, again, from the second, it's in the middle there, talking about wonder. It is to be intrigued by the effects of a cause that remains hidden from us, but is potentially knowable. Well, I submit to you, quite frankly, this is why we operate the way we do as human beings. I mean, embracing the experience of wonder implies at least some vestige, some little trace of humility, I would say. And it requires it. I mean, in other words, if you're truly wondering, you aren't operating from a stance of, having it all figured out. And you aren't fully in control in a sense either. You are having an experience, maybe even subconsciously, that you are part of something much greater that you don't make all on your own. That we don't make the world around us. We have a lot of things we can do in that world. We have a tremendous amount of power in that sense, for good or for evil, but you know what, though? That power doesn't come from us. Like we tap into it. And why is that? Well, I think it's just the reality of who and what we are. And quite frankly, I think in that case, wonder then is a far more appropriate posture for human beings than pride, or know-it-allness. There's a fun word. Know-it-allness. I'm going to have to look that up later. Yeah, to be a know-it-all. And in fact, like when you say that as an insult, and that's how it's said, right? Oh, so-and-so, he's a know-it-all. Well, I don't know about you, but when I say that, I don't actually mean it, right? Like I don't actually think the jerk or the person that I'm upset with, whatever, who I'm throwing that accusation at, oh, he's a know-it-all. I don't actually think he knows it all. In fact, I'm sort of saying that precisely because it annoys me that he thinks he knows everything, right? And when you meet someone who really does that, right? Like when someone, I mean, we all do it to some degree, but when someone really like lives that way, it goes around like, well, actually, and like jumps in, you're like, oh boy, like it just really makes you mad, right? And I think that's because deep down we all know, hey, look, you don't know it all. Maybe there's some mystery here. Maybe there's some circumstances you don't understand about this. We see that all the time, right? Like we know that in our bones. We know that we don't know it all. That's, again, back to Socrates, that idea of like wisdom begins in wonder, That true wisdom really comes from recognizing and admitting that I don't know it all. You know, I don't really know anything in the grand scheme of things. Like I could learn in a science class, in an astronomy class, very detailed, information about how the sun works, but I don't get the sun. I mean, the sun is unbelievable. That's just one star. So I think that this is just natural. I think it's human nature. I think, by nature, we are limited beings, right? Like we have dimensions, we have limits. I can know so much, but I can never possibly know or understand even a fraction of reality, right? And that's not, and this is, I think, a mistake a lot of people make. Personally, the jump to we just need to keep learning. Yes, that's good. But the idea that someday we will know it all. No. We can't. We can't. And if we proceed, I think, with an attitude we're just, that's the goal is to know it all. And then, very easily we can make the jump to and then anything I have to do to make that happen is okay. You're going to go and run into a lot of dangerous things, right? And quite frankly, I think when we take a step back and we just pause, recognize that, at the end of the day, I am limited. There will be a maximum number of things I can know, things I can remotely understand, and that's okay. Not only is that okay, it's part of who I am. I sense mystery around me, and we all do this. And this is what's neat, we instinctively, through that wonder, through that marvel, through that amazement and astonishment, that attitude that doesn't really seek to be fixed. It's not a problem to be solved. It's part of who we are. To recognize that there is more going on than I can see. There's more going on in this moment in my life than as a parent. That there's something beyond the signs and symbols and gestures and words mean things. How do you feel when someone gives you a middle finger when you're driving down the road? Let me just throw that one out there. It instantly creates a response in you. Why? Because someone is extending one particular appendage? No, it's because that means something, right? It's a sign. It points to a reality beyond itself by nature. In other words, it is communicating a particular attitude and particular, feeling about you that this person is expressing with one gesture, right? That's kind of a base example to use, but my gosh, there it is, right? So positive and negative here we can experience this, but true wonder, true mystery. I mean, we instinctively put it into our best literature, our music, movies, art. Every mode of human expression carries this reality with it. And quite frankly, as I wrap the show up for today, this is why I do this show, really. And this is what hit me the other day, right? I'll talk about a movie, I'll talk about a book, and I'll share this with friends, right? And this whole podcast is meant to basically be a digital, sort of representation, at least of my half, as best I can, of these kinds of conversations that I have with family and friends all the time, But we all, I think, do this. We all want to tap into that deeper mystery, that deeper meaning. Why am I here, right? Why am I drawn to love stories? Why do I like when a hero wins and a villain fails? What's that mean? What's the deeper echo in my heart right there of justice, of glory, of love, of, forgiveness? What do these things mean? So that's it for the Gracious Guest Show today. It's probably the most philosophical kind of show that I've ever done on here before. So I hope you enjoy it. I'd love some feedback on this, guys. Seriously, shoot me an email over at thegraciousguest@gmail.com. Check out the Twitter page. My Twitter handle is @gracious_guest. So go ahead and over there and follow me on Twitter and see what I'm up to. And why don't you share your stories of wonder with me? think about this a little bit, stew on it, email me, tell me I'm totally way off, or tell me, hey, that was actually really interesting, and here's an experience that I've had, where I really wondered, and I had this experience of marvel and astonishment, right? So, this is the Gracious Guest Show, and until next time, don't forget to wonder. Take care.